got to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show, and welcome to Every Best Picture, our series of ongoing video reviews where we are looking at every Oscar Best Picture winner from the beginning right up to the present day. This year, yes, it's 1945, and we are doing
right.
The Lost Weekend.
Wow, we finally have reached the end of World War II,
Yeah,
James. And we won. We won.
Oh, spoilers. Okay, fine.
Yeah. This is a spoiler show. What'd you think of The Lost Weekend? Obviously, this is probably Ray Milland's biggest film, probably pinnacle of his career. What say you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so Ray Milland, Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder was on a bit of a run at the moment. You know, he had done like Double Indemnity and lots of other things like that. You know, and he was incredibly prolific. And this tells the story of a sort of lush, essentially a washed up alcoholic writer in New York City called Don Burnham, who slips out of what's supposed to be a weekend away with his brother in order to kind of just go on a bender, essentially. And it just traces him over sort of the 3 or 4 days while he is sort of drinking away all of his responsibilities, all of his sorrows, and really sort of riding the wave of what alcoholism looked like and the institution and the infrastructure in place in sort of 1940s New York City. And we get some flashbacks to his kind of the beginnings of his relationship with the girlfriend that he has. I mean, I really like this movie, actually.
Yeah.
It's it's really
did you
hard.
find though with today's sensibilities it losing something in time? Because obviously this would have been hugely impactful to the point where Ray Milland himself struggled with doing the role because of the level of alcoholism in it. And yet looking through looking at the film through a 21st century 2023 lens, you're thinking, it's not that big a deal.
Well, I kind of still felt that it kind of hit all the right spots. I think maybe we've sort of it's been diluted to some degree, that we've seen so many of these kind of films now. I mean, you think of something like Leaving Las Vegas is an obvious touchstone, or recently Another Round, the Danish movie from a couple of years ago, which really look at the destructive nature of alcoholism, but they contextualize it within sort of the more permissive side of social drinking and things like that. And I thought actually this did a pretty decent job. I mean, it starts off and I was like, and he goes to the bar, and as soon as like the booze touched his lips, he completely transforms his personality, and he becomes one of those guys who talks in a very sort of flowery and over-exaggerated way to the barman, talks to the barman like he's his best friend. And I was kind of like, I wonder if this is where some of those kind of the cliches they've become now sort of started, whether this was one of the first images that the first times we ever saw this image of the kind of barfly lush, where he just sits there and he waxes lyrical and he's philosophizing with a very unimpressed barman, it must be said. But as it unfolded, I found that it did a good job. It didn't go too heavy, too hard on the melodrama. It allowed it permitted Don to enjoy himself as well in moments at times. And I think that that's always important with this kind of story, is that you don't just focus on the lows, or it isn't merely you go up and then you come crashing down, because neither of those dramatizations are accurate. Part of the problem is that it continues to be enjoyable and you continue to crash again and again and again. And I thought that this did that in a pretty sort of realistic way.
Yeah, I agree. If they'd kind of stayed in the gutter with his alcoholism, it wouldn't have been nearly as an entertaining film. As like, even when it begins and he's with his brother, there's almost a comical element of him hiding the bottle outside the window.
Right.
And it made me think of my wife's grandfather when we first got married before he passed away. He was that kind of alcoholic. They had to go and keep trying to find where he was hiding the booze in the house, because he would do that. And so seeing that just made me harken back to it. It was bittersweet. It was tragic and funny. It was like it broke people's hearts. And yet when you'd see where he would hide stuff, it became kind of funny.
Yeah, no, and I think does touch on that. I love that opening shot where you get, the vista of Manhattan, and then the camera kind of sort of pans across. It feels like the opening of a Hitchcock movie, like obviously it was years later, but like the opening shot of Psycho is like that, where it kind of zooms in on a window, or Rear Window is like that. And there's definitely an air of Jimmy Stewart to Ray Milland in this.
Yes,
I kept sort of almost forgetting it was Ray Milland and kind of almost putting Jimmy Stewart in there in his place. But yeah, when you kind of see the bottle hanging outside the window first, it's great because it kind of means that we're in on the gag. We're in on his deception before anybody else in the scene is.
Yeah.
And I thought, so it kind of puts him in a kind of sympathetic light for the audience straight away. You're kind of on his side.
Yeah. And it gives we have to be on his side to have some kind of empathy with his girlfriend, who sticks with him through thick and thin. Even when the brother is considering abandoning him, as much as the brother loves him, she sticks with him because, like you said, he can be very charming. He does really love her. And when he's not drinking, and you've heard this story from many alcoholics, this is probably why it resonated so well. For the first time, a nation of alcoholics was seeing their stories up on the big screen for the first time.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And what I was surprised about with that is because I'd seen it before, but I couldn't remember where it fell on this. Is, as you pointed out right at the beginning, this is 1945, it was shot in 1944. So the war is ongoing, but we're near the end of the war. So there would have been a number of kind of like returning soldiers and veterans and whatever, and even those who stayed behind. So there would have been a lot of alcoholism, I think, in the forefront, and obviously there's veterans from previous wars, and prohibition's not that long ago, and so I couldn't remember if he was a returning veteran or anything like that, as it is not. And what was interesting,
remember them highlighting that.
No, what's interesting is that it's 1944 and there's no mention of the war whatsoever in the film at all. Like nothing, not in the hospitals.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Not on the papers, not in the streets. There are no USO parties or anything like that. There's nothing. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting because it illustrates that this is a perpetual problem. This is you can't blame this on the war. Right. Basically, this is obviously it's going to be impacting a number of people because of the war and because of their suffering during the war. I think it's going to probably bring it out of a lot of people. But the film, I think, quite smartly, because it's based on a book that was written only the previous year, so it was all written during the war, and I think they were quite right to sort of detach it from that, and I think it makes it a more sort of universal story as well. There's something more sort of timeless about it as a result of that, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, this is probably one of the first films that really demonstrates what addicts and the descent of addiction and what addicts will do in order to get their fix or their drink. When he goes and he's this very upstanding citizen of New York society. I mean, he's not high end, but he's certainly not the person who goes into a bar and steals money from somebody's purse. But it shows you what will happen. And yet, when someone who's an addict finds themselves in that place, their whole moral landscape drops, their moral compass gets thrown out the window, and they descend into this. And it made me think of why this movie seemed to resonate so well with the American public. And I think it was probably the first time that they're really seeing this reality portrayed on a big screen like this. And it's something that if a person themselves is not a drinker, they have a family member who is, or a friend who is. Everybody has somebody they know that has been enslaved to alcohol or drugs. And so, I thought Billy Wilder did a great, you said it earlier too, even though it might be a little tame by some of our sensibilities today, he does, as you said, hit all the right buttons through the course of the film.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think it's fairly unique to alcoholism, really, is that it's probably the only addiction that is really coming to mind that everybody has had a taste of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's smoking, there's drugs, there's gambling, there's all these other addictions where there are very significant percentages of the population who have never done those things.
Right.
And so there is a detachment, but I think pretty much everybody has at least had a drink at some point, and there are many people who drink sensibly, regularly, and don't perceive themselves to have any kind of problem. They're able to just drink socially, and so I think it's one of those. It's the one sort of addiction that everybody can kind of really understand. I think everybody has tasted it firsthand, and so they know just how easy it is and how easily one can just sort of let it sort of slip away from you.
And even those who drink sensibly, more often than not, have at least a handful of stories of those moments when they didn't. And so there is a bridge of relatability in this film. But like you said, a movie about drug addiction, there might be more detachment from something like that.
Well, that's it. Watching a film like Train Spotting or Requiem for a Dream or Drugstore Cowboy, something like that, where it's like all these like dropouts,
heroin addicts,
shooting up smack in some squat somewhere. I think most people have not done that or have not had that experience, and whereas everybody's had one too many when it comes to a drink, and you
and I more so than others.
Well, quite possibly, but we certainly know our fair share of people who drink to excess on a regular basis and out of control. But what I like about it is how it illustrates and how well it illustrates sort of the fluctuation of it. It begins and he hasn't had a drink, and that everyone's like around him and supporting him, and no one's really giving him a hard time. They're actually all being very encouraging. His brother and his girlfriend are this pretty intense support network for him, and they're all like, this will do you good, this will be great, you're doing so well. And you realize very quickly it's only been 10 days since he's had a drink, but it's all good and everything's good, although we already know that he's got a bottle hidden out the window. So has it actually been 10 days, or maybe it's been less than
10 minutes?
Right. And then very quickly, as soon as he's left alone, he has snuck out, bought 2 bottles with the last money he had, and then hit the bar straight away, and he's drinking shots whilst holding these 2 bottles with these apples on top to hide them that he's going to take home. And his whole weekend sort of spirals out of control from then. But I thought one of the most interesting sequences is the sequence where he kind of wakes up in the hospital. Where he's it's after he's stolen the purse and he's been kicked out of the restaurant, and he's kind of gone completely hit rock bottom, and he passes out and he wakes up in this hospital, and it's like the alcoholics wing of a hospital. And so it's kind of like a halfway house between rehab and a prison almost. And it's full, and the first thing he does is he hears the strange breathing of the person in the bed next to him, and he wakes up and he looks around, and and there's a guy just kind of standing over his bed, and it's full of like weirdos, quote unquote weirdos, and so he very quickly realized, oh no, I'm not one of these people, I'm not. This is not me. And then you've got that character Bim, the male nurse,
right,
who's so mean, but I saw this very interesting sort of video essay about this movie, and the guy Alex Cox who did it, who's actually a filmmaker as well himself, he was talking about the shift in perspective between a 1940s audience and a contemporary audience. And he was saying that in 1940s, it seemed to be that people were generally perceiving the movie to be a film about a struggling writer, a failed writer with writer's block who can't get his book written because of his drinking. But the focus was far more on the fact that he was a writer struggling with an obstacle rather than an alcoholic who was probably never going to write this book. And it raises the question, was he ever really a writer? And he said that there are a number of different sort of shifts in perspective between then and now. One is that the way his brother and his girlfriend support him so much is seen there as being really caring, but in today's audience, for today's audiences, they're possibly being far too soft on him and far too accommodating, almost to the point of enabling him, and maybe they should be slightly stricter on him. But the main point I thought was interesting is that Bim, the male nurse, who's laying down the law, saying this is how it's going to be. At the time, there were lots of really savage reviews written saying that he was just this nasty, horrible, monstrous character who was just cruel and sadistic and vindictive and all the rest of it. Whereas if you look at it today, he's like the most sensible, straightforward, honest guy.
Hard love, man.
Yeah,
hard love.
He's just like, this is the situation you're in, and this is how we're going to get through it. And you've just got to follow the rules, and they're quite reasonable rules. And otherwise, you're not getting out. But back in 1940s, he was like the villain of the piece almost.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting, and not the alcohol. You probably going to disagree with this, but one of the things I was thinking while I was watching the film is, I enjoy Ray Milland more when he's a character actor than when he's the lead. I just found, and this is nothing about him, I actually think his best actor is well deserved. This is more of a me thing than a him thing. I realize that I enjoy when he is the secondary character, when he's more the villain, when he's the color commentator on the side. Him as the lead, I would prefer another lead. I don't know what it is about him, his delivery, the sound of his voice, but I could never quite understand why this girl, I guess I just don't find him attractive. That's what it comes down to. And so I know you're probably going to disagree with me on that because this is purely a me thing. But what are your thoughts on old Ray?
You know what? I was kind of thinking, I'm not sure how many other things I've seen him in, but as I was listening to, I was quickly scrolling through, and I've seen him in loads of things actually. I think his great strength, his greatest attribute is that he's kind of such an everyman, is that he is kind of forgettable. I've already mentioned that I kept almost forgetting that it wasn't Jimmy Stewart in this role. The thing I always think of when I hear his name is the man with X-ray eyes.
That one. That one as well.
I think of that first, and then I think of this, and then I've kind of forget everything else. So I don't, if I'm completely honest, I don't really have a strong opinion about him one way or the other.
See, I think maybe the character actor preference I have is because I'm a little bit older than you. So I watched a lot of TV and movies in the 70s and 80s when he had transitioned back into being a character actor. He was no longer the lead. So I was used to seeing him in the pilot of Battlestar Galactica. You, Liz and I and yourself were talking about Rich Man, Poor Man the other day at a critic screening, and he played Calderwood, the business magnate who mentors Peter Strauss's character, and he's kind of this cantankerous old curmudgeon guy. And so I've always enjoyed him as kind of the angry older guy who pops up on the Love Boat or Fantasy Island or Rich Man, Poor Man. So to see him suddenly as this suave, well, he's an alcoholic, but essentially he's a suave leading man in 1940s Manhattan was a bit of a jump shift for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, like I say, I don't think he's really on my radar.
Yeah,
to that degree. So I don't really have an opinion about how I see him as a performer.
Yeah. But like you said, he has a hugely extensive filmography on TV and movies. I mean, the guy was never out of work, it seems. Yeah,
it does. And it seems like he started working almost like in the late 20s or something, and seemed to work right up until he died in like 1986. And I think he was probably working for almost that entire time.
Yeah, easily.
Which is pretty impressive. But yeah, I mean, I've seen him in a bunch of stuff. You know, The Major and the Minor. These are Billy Wilder movies. Major and the Minor. I saw him in The Uninvited, Ministry of Fear, The Big Clock, Dial M for Murder. You know, so he's been in a couple of notable Hitchcock movies. And it's funny that you were talking about him as sort of a suave, sophisticated leading man who seems to be doing quite well for himself, because that's not how I see him at all in this movie. You know, he's living with his brother because he can't get a job because his drinking gets in the way, and he's a writer who hasn't written anything. And all he seems to do is just go down the local bar and annoy them. He gets so drunk that he annoys them. He's managed to hang on to this girl through her just stubborn big-heartedness, I think, more than anything else. You know, she has that big speech at the end. It's like, I'm not going to give up on you. You know, I'm determined to sort of see this through. And right from the very beginning, he even sort of says, you know, it's true, I'm a drunk. Because the brother
Yeah.
tries to convince her that it was him, that he's the drunk.
Yeah. And he
He comes clean and says, no, it's me. I'm drunk. And she was like, it's fine. I'm gonna stick with you. And I think maybe that's just sort of the attitude that far more women had back then, far more than probably should have back then. And they sort of put up with this thing.
It's probably not healthy. Yeah, it's not healthy, actually.
Well, it certainly wouldn't have been seen as a sickness the way that it's recognized as these days, an alcoholic addiction. It would have just been seen as a bad habit.
Yeah. Although I would say that this movie's sensibilities, although they wouldn't have diagnosed it in a medical situation like we would have today, it definitely is sympathetic to that notion being developed. Like you feel like there's something. Yes, it's an addiction, but there's something that he's not totally responsible for. There's something inside that is you're both angry with him. Like anybody who drinks too much, you're both angry with him and you're sympathetic for him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's why the film works as well as it does.
Yeah.
It doesn't demonize him. It demonizes the addiction. Yeah. And it sort of shows that people are sympathetic, but they can be stretched too far,
Yeah.
But I quite like the other supporting character I like is Gloria, the kind of the girl. Is she a prostitute or kind of sometime ex-escort or something? A good time girl, I suppose.
In 1945, it probably wouldn't have been as apparent. We would have made it a little more apparent today. That's probably a little more ambiguous in 1945.
Yeah, it's funny the way they talk about it, considering how bluntly and matter-of-factly they do address the alcoholism and they do address his drinking. They never come out and say exactly what she does. They just she meets with men. She has like dates with different men who all seem to come from Albany to see the statue of Grant, and they kind of tease her about that. Yeah. And but then she's willing to drop it all and blow a guy off who's walks in to meet her if Don is prepared to sort of give a bit of his time for her. So she clearly sort of holds a candle for him.
Well, maybe Billy Wilder, figuring he's tackling alcoholism, be pushing his luck if he tried to throw in prostitution as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, but she clearly is. That's what she's doing. Yeah, even if it's just sort of part time, just on the weekends or whatever. But it's just curious how how they still kind of sort of talk around it, or just joke about it rather than address it head on like they do with the drinking. But I mean, fair play to Don. I mean, he's still got it. The ladies seem to love him, regardless of the fact that he's a complete lush, even when he blows her off completely, Gloria.
Yeah.
And then he's supposed to show up at that evening and take her out on the town, and she goes and gets her hair done and all this kind of stuff. He completely blows her off. And then it turns up on her door like the following day, completely drunk, asking for money.
Get out of here. Yeah,
and even then, she's still like, "But you do like me just a little bit, don't you?" It's like, "Oh, come on, girl, you can do better."
Yeah. I don't know how that would go over with all the female audiences today, but we'll say that the voters at the 18th Academy Awards sure love this movie.
They really did. I mean, it got nominated for like 7 Oscars, and it won 4.
Yeah,
it won Best Picture, won Best Director for Billy Wilder, as well as Best Adapted Screenplay for that was Billy Wilder as well, wasn't it? Yeah, with Charles Brackett, and then of course Best Actor for Ray Milland. It was quite the belle of the ball, as you might say, up against some very stiff competition.
Indeed, what competition was it up against, James?
Okay, well, the other nominees for Best Picture that year were Anchors Aweigh, which I'm not sure that I've seen. That's Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly, but I'm not sure I've seen that because what's the other one that's a bit like that? Is it On the Town? Is the other?
I think it's On the Town. I think On the Town's the one I've seen. I may be in your camp. I don't think I've seen Anchors Aweigh. Yeah,
I'm not sure I've seen it. The Bells of St. Mary. I don't think I've seen that either. But it's got Ingrid Bergman in it, and she won. No, she was nominated for Best Actress, but you've seen that Bells of St. Mary?
I did, like when I was a kid. With my dad, we would watch these movies on Saturday afternoons. So I definitely remember watching it because I had a bit of a crush on Ingrid Bergman.
Well, who doesn't? I mean, come on. Ingrid Bergman, absolute beauty. And that's directed by Leo McCarey, who did Going My Way that we talked about just the other week.
Well, it's a sequel to it. He's playing the same character.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, okay, fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's
okay,
playing Father O'Malley again. Same. Father O'Malley's in a new parish.
Yes, it is. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, movie's not on my radar at all. Okay. But the other two most certainly are Mildred Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely fantastic movie for which Joan Crawford won Best Actress.
I have not seen it.
Directed by Michael Curtiz, who directed Casablanca, of course.
Yes,
just a couple of years before. It's brilliant. It's a great. It's one of those great women's pictures of the 1940s. It's absolutely fabulous. But it's got like a lot more film noir elements in it as well.
Okay,
so it's not just sort of a kitchen sink melodrama. It's really good, and Joan Crawford's amazing in it. You should definitely check that out. And then the other one is Spellbound, the Hitchcock movie Spellbound with that's Gregory Peck, isn't it? And Ingrid Bergman. Oh, Ingrid Bergman in 2 Best Picture nominees that year.
Coming off of Casablanca a couple of years earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she was on a roll. The big thing about Spellbound, because it's about psychiatry, so that's interesting. So you've got a film about sort of alcoholism and addiction and psychiatry running neck and neck. And there's a dream sequence in Spellbound that's directed by Salvador Dali. Yeah, the great surrealist. The fact that Alfred Hitchcock would let anybody direct a part of his movie for them. But yeah, I'm absolutely sure that's the bit the film I'm talking about. But yes, there is. There's a very bizarre, visually very interesting dream sequence in the movie. Directed by Dali.
I was a huge listener of old time radio that made a comeback in the 80s. Essentially in the 80s, it became a thing to get cassette tapes. You go to the record store and get the old 30s and 40s and 50s radio shows on cassette. And I had Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound, and Joseph Cotton played the lead in the audio radio version of it. Okay. And so I've never seen the movie Spellbound, but I've listened to the radio play more times than I could recount.
Oh, well, that's fabulous in and of itself, but that would mean that you don't get the dream sequence. You definitely check it out. I mean, it's Hitchcock. So it should be relatively easy to get your hands on it, but it's a really good one.
Yeah,
so it's a lot of fun, that one.
Fantastic,
and it's got Ingrid Bergman in it. So
you can't go wrong there. So I guess at the end of any one of these Every Best Picture reviews, summaries, I guess, we asked, does The Lost Weekend stand the test of time? Does it hold up? Does it deserve its place in Oscar history? I'm going to go out on a limb here, James. I think you think it does, and I think so do I.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I was going to say actually is absolutely it stands up. Absolutely stands the test of time. I mean, I think we've both been quite taken with just how relevant it still is and how sort of even-handedly it deals with the problem. It's not like whipping up some tabloid sort of scaremongering about the evil source or anything like that. I think it's a really, really sort of even-handed approach to the problem, and for that reason, and as I mentioned before, because it doesn't have like any sort of direct references to like the war or anything like that, it doesn't necessarily feel tagged to any particular time period.
Right.
So I think that helps it feel just a little bit more universal, more timeless, and what have you. So yeah, I think it absolutely stands the test of time. Does it deserve its place in Oscar history, though? As a Best Picture candidate, it still feels a bit of a strange choice to me. It doesn't leap out at you as Best Picture winner, but then it is kind of a social issue movie, and every now and again one of those comes along that does win over voters. As ever, you look at the competition, and particularly Mildred Pierce and Spellbound, probably Mildred Pierce more than any other. It's just a great movie. So on that note, I'd probably say it's a strange one, and you would have to have probably been there to test the measure the temperature of the room on the night. But it kind of feels like one of those ones that was very much a kind of sort of populist sort of vote. So does it really sort of stand up alongside the other Oscar winners? I'm not so sure. It feels a strange winner.
Right.
But I do want to get this in before we finish. it was riding a huge wave of success. It was a very sort of it was a box office hit, and it premiered at Cannes, where it won what would become the Palme d'Or. It won the main prize at the Cannes Film Festival earlier in the year, and Ray Milland also won Best Actor at Cannes. Two things that can't happen anymore. You can't win Palme d'Or and Best Actor anymore for the same movie. And also, at the time, it wasn't called the Palme d'Or yet. It was called the Grand Prix, which later became the second thing. Only 3 films. And I don't know if you looked it up. I was going to ask.
I looked it up.
Only 3 films have ever won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and gone on to win Best Picture. This was the first one. A decade later, Marty would do it, and then Parasite.
Marty's the one I'm looking forward to reviewing in just a few. That's going to be interesting. One of the things I wanted to highlight before we sign off here is I did read that the initial screening of this film actually almost caused the producers to shelve it because they didn't have the original score yet put in, and they had kind of a jazzy number temporarily in its place. And because of the jazz number, the alcohol sequences with Ray Milland seemed overwrought, overplayed, overblown. And so the audiences were laughing through it. And when they saw them laughing, they nearly considered shelving it until they put in the score that was originally intended, which we see in the theatrical version. And then the whole tone change, which really demonstrates what music does to a film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember I've seen, because I do some like festival programming and things like that, I've seen rough cuts of movies. Sometimes I get sent like an unfinished movie. It's like, oh, this is just a temp score, and you know, we're still working on the music. And sometimes you're watching something with no music, and it makes so much difference. It just feels so dead and so leaden and so dry and slow and whatever. But then absolutely what the choice of music that you put in. And, you know, you see directors do that, filmmakers do that deliberately. You see it a lot in trailers these days. They'll deliberately put in a song that feels inappropriate.
Right.
You know, in order to juxtapose it and create a mood. I mean, there's the great shootout scene in Face Off to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, you know, is one example that immediately leaps to mind. But so it's incredibly powerful. When you were talking about that very quickly, one thing I was reminded of that I did also read is apparently when the movie was in production or before it came out, because of course the novel was already out, so people knew what it was about. Apparently the liquor industry, the liquor companies were terrified about the movie coming out. You know, Prohibition had only ended just a few years ago. They'd only really kind of got the industry back on its feet. And then this movie was coming out, which was going to sort of scare the pants off people. They were terrified it was going to scare people into not drinking.
Yeah.
And so apparently they offered an incredible sum of money to the studio, I think it's Universal, not to release it. And fortunately for all of us, Universal turned them down. And Billy Wilder has been quoted as saying, it's a good thing they didn't offer the money to me because I probably would have taken it.
Yeah. True. Fair enough. Well, that's James and I's opinion of Billy Wilder's The Lost Weekend starring Ray Milland. But what's your thoughts on this classic from 1945? Why don't you leave us a comment in the comment below? We'd love to interact with you on the film. James?
Absolutely. And also, what are your other favorite Billy Wilder movies? But what are your favorite movies about alcoholism? We mentioned Leaving Las Vegas and Another Round. The other great one for me is Withnell and I, which I know that you haven't seen.
I was thinking Sideways. The Alexander Payne film.
But what else are we missing? What are other great movies that deal with drinking as an addiction, as a pastime, whatever? Let us know.
That's the theme of the film.
See you next time.